You're with Kronos. We don't just tell history, we take you there. Tonight, we're walking into a world that shouldn't exist. A world your mind will struggle to accept even as the evidence proves it real. Because what I'm about to show you breaks every assumption you've ever made about one of the most hostile places on Earth. What if I told you that 6,000 years ago, where you see only sand today, there was water? Not a mirage. Not a memory preserved in myth. Actual water, lakes the size of England, rivers flowing north and south, rain falling in sheets that soaked the earth and turned it green. Where camels now struggle across endless dunes, hippos once wallowed in shallows. Where nothing grows for hundreds of miles, acacia trees once spread their canopy over grass that rippled in wind and rain. Where silence now presses against your ears like a physical weight, there was the sound of life, bird calls, thunder, the lowing of cattle, children laughing near water that seemed like it would last forever. This is not speculation. This is not myth. The evidence is carved into stone, painted on cave walls, buried in sediment cores pulled from the Mediterranean seafloor, written in pollen grains and animal bones and the dried beds of rivers that once flowed with enough force to carve channels through bedrock. The Sahara was green. Not all of it, not uniformly, but green enough that people lived there, not as desperate nomads clinging to rare oases, but as settled communities with cattle and crops, with art and stories, with children who grew up never imagining that water could simply stop falling from the sky. And then it did. This is the story of the African humid period, a window in time when orbital mechanics and ocean currents conspired to turn the world's largest hot desert into savanna, and its ending when those same forces shifted, the rains failed, and an entire world died of thirst. Tonight we stand at that threshold. Not in our time, but in theirs. It is approximately 5,500 years ago. You are in what will one day be called the Central Sahara, in the region that will become northern Chad. Right now, it is the edge of a lake, Lake Megachad, a body of water larger than the Caspian Sea, fed by rivers flowing from highlands that catch monsoon rains carried north from the tropical Atlantic. The sun is setting. The air smells of water and wet earth, of fish and papyrus reeds, of smoke from cooking fires in a settlement half a kilometer from shore. The sky is enormous, painted in oranges and purples, reflected in water that stretches to the horizon. You can hear cattle lowing as herders bring them back from pasture. You can hear children playing at the water's edge, their voices carrying clearly across the evening calm. You can hear birds, thousands of them, settling into the reeds for the night, a sound like wind moving through forest. This is the world. This is normal. This is what has always been and, as far as anyone alive can imagine, what always will be. But the wind is changing. Not tonight. Not this year. But it's coming. A shift so gradual that no single generation will notice it happening, yet so total that within 1,500 years, this lake will be gone, these settlements will be abandoned, and sand will cover everything you see as if none of it ever existed. Let's go back further. You need to understand what created this Green Sahara before you can understand what destroyed it. 15,000 years ago, the Sahara is even drier than it is today. The last glacial maximum, the peak of the most recent ice age, has locked vast amounts of water in ice sheets covering North America and Europe. Sea levels are 120 meters lower than they will be in our time. The Mediterranean is smaller. The Atlantic coastline of Africa extends kilometers beyond where it will eventually settle. And North Africa is a wasteland. Not the romantic, cinematic wasteland of golden dunes, but a brutal expanse of rock and gravel, wind-scoured and lifeless. Sand seas stretch for thousands of kilometers. There is almost no rain. What few plants survive cling to scattered depressions where groundwater seeps to the surface. Animals are rare. A few gazelles, some adapted rodents, predators so scarce they might as well be ghosts. The people who live here, and they do live here, because humans are relentlessly adaptable, exist in tiny groups, moving constantly, following ephemeral water sources, hunting whatever they can find. Life is hard in a way that is difficult to imagine. Every day is survival. Every generation passes down knowledge of where water might be found, where certain plants grow after rare rains, how to read the landscape for signs of game. But then the ice sheets begin to retreat. Slowly, over thousands of years, the climate shifts. The Earth's orbital parameters, the tilt of its axis, the shape of its orbit around the Sun, the wobble of its spin, change in ways that increase summer solar radiation in the northern hemisphere. This is not dramatic. No one alive notices the difference year to year. But over centuries, the additional summer heat strengthens the African monsoon system. The intertropical convergence zone, the belt of low pressure near the equator where trade winds meet and produce heavy rainfall, shifts north. Moist air from the Atlantic penetrates deeper into the continent. Around 11,000 BCE, the rains begin. At first, they are sporadic. A wet year followed by several dry ones. But gradually, the pattern establishes itself. The summer monsoons become reliable. Rain falls across the Sahel, the transitional zone between the Sahara and the tropical forests to the south, and pushes north into what had been pure desert. Grass seeds that have lain dormant in the soil for decades, for centuries, germinate. Within a generation, areas that were bare rock are covered in seasonal grasses. Shrubs follow. Then trees, acacias first, adapted to dry conditions, then more water-dependent species as the rains continue. Animals move in. First the hardy desert species, gazelles, oryx, expanding their range. Then grassland species from the south, elephants, giraffes, antelope. Then water-dependent species, hippos, crocodiles, fish. The animals follow the water, and the water is spreading north. By 9000 BCE, the transformation is well underway. Rivers flow where there had been only dry wadis, seasonal channels that filled briefly during rare storms. These rivers are fed by monsoon rains falling on the Tibesti and Ahagar massifs, highland regions in what is now Chad and Algeria. The water flows into basins, creating lakes. Some of these lakes are vast. Lake Megachad forms in the basin that will one day hold the much smaller Lake Chad. At its maximum extent, around 6000 BCE, Megachad covers approximately 400,000 square kilometers, an area larger than Germany, deeper than 50 meters in places. It is fed by rivers flowing from the south and west, and it overflows northward through a channel that will one day be called the Bahr el Ghazal, River of Gazelles. This is not the only lake. Across the Sahara, wherever topography creates a depression, water collects. Lakes form in Libya, in Algeria, in Mauritania. Some are seasonal, filling during the monsoon and shrinking in the dry season. Others are permanent, deep enough and stable enough to support complex ecosystems. The landscape is not uniform. The Sahara is too vast for that. In the far north, near the Mediterranean coast, the climate remains dry. This is the rain shadow of the Atlas Mountains. In the far south, the vegetation transitions into full tropical savanna. But across the central band, from the Atlantic coast to the Nile Valley, the landscape is open grassland dotted with trees, cut by seasonal streams, punctuated by lakes and wetlands. Think of the Serengeti. Think of the Okavango Delta. Think of the best grazing land in modern East Africa, and you're close to imagining what the Green Sahara looked like. And people come. Humans, always following the resources, migrate into the region from the south, from the Nile Valley, possibly from the north as Mediterranean coastal populations expand. They bring livestock, cattle, goats, sheep. They bring knowledge of pottery, of fishing, of managing herds. They establish settlements near the lakes and rivers. The settlement you're standing near, on the shore of Megachad around 5,500 years ago, is home to perhaps 200 people. The houses are simple, frameworks of wooden poles covered with reed mats and animal hides. They're not built to last centuries because they don't need to be. When the grazing gets thin or the fish move, the settlement moves. The houses can be disassembled and rebuilt elsewhere within days. But this settlement has been here for 3 generations. The fishing is good. The grazing is excellent. The water is clean and seems inexhaustible. Children born here have never known thirst. Old people tell stories of harder times, dry times, times when their grandparents wandered through lands where rain was rare. But those stories feel distant, almost mythical. Why would anyone live that way when water is everywhere? Look at the people. They are tall, lean, with features that anthropologists will later struggle to categorize because they predate the modern divisions of African populations. Their skin is dark, adapted to intense sun, but their lifestyle is not one of desperation. They wear jewelry made from shells traded from the Mediterranean coast, hundreds of kilometers north. They wear beads made from ostrich eggshell. Their pottery is decorated with intricate patterns, wavy lines, cross-hatching, geometric designs that suggest not just function but aesthetics, culture, identity. They keep cattle. This is crucial. Cattle require water, lots of it. A cow drinks 30 to 50 liters per day. You cannot keep cattle in a desert. The presence of cattle herding across the Sahara during this period is proof, absolute, undeniable proof, that water was abundant. The rock art tells the story better than any text could. Across the Sahara, in the Tassili Eniger Plateau in Algeria, in the Akakis Mountains of Libya, in Tibesti, in Air, in dozens of smaller sites, the people paint and carve images on rock faces. These are not crude stick figures. They are sophisticated, detailed, beautiful works of art. They show cattle, hundreds of images of cattle, some naturalistic, some stylized, some enormous and clearly ceremonial. The cattle are depicted with careful attention to breed characteristics, to the curve of horns, to spots and colors. These are not generic symbols. These are portraits of specific animals, valued animals, animals that mattered. They show people dancing, their bodies in motion, their arms raised, wearing elaborate headdresses and decorative clothing. They show hunting scenes, people with bows pursuing giraffes, elephants, antelope. They show domestic scenes, women grinding grain, children playing, dogs accompanying hunters. And they show water. Boats appear in the rock art, boats with people fishing, boats carrying goods, boats with multiple rowers. Some of the boats are large enough to suggest trade or travel across significant bodies of water. You don't build boats for decoration. You build them because you need to cross water too deep to wade, too wide to avoid. One image, painted on a rock shelter in Tassili Eniger, shows what archaeologists call the swimmers, human figures in horizontal positions, arms and legs extended, surrounded by wavy lines that clearly represent water. They are swimming. Not drowning, not struggling, swimming, recreationally, in water abundant enough to immerse yourself in for pleasure. Try to imagine that. Imagine living in what is now the Central Sahara and having enough water not just to drink, not just to water your cattle, but to swim in. To teach your children to swim in. To remember swimming in, to value it enough to paint it on rock so that future generations would know, we were here and there was water and life was good. The rock art sites often show chronological sequences. Earlier images show wild animals, elephants, rhinos, hippos, giraffes, being hunted. Later images show cattle and domestication. The latest images, painted toward the end of the Green Sahara period, show something else, camels. The appearance of camels in the rock art is a marker. Camels are desert animals, adapted to long periods without water. When camels appear in the art, it means the environment has already changed. The people are adapting to a drier world. But we're not there yet. It's still 5,500 years ago. The lake is still full. The cattle are fat. The children are healthy. An old woman sits outside her house as the sun sets. Her name, if we could know it, might sound like the click languages of southern Africa, or like the Nilo-Saharan languages still spoken in isolated pockets of the Sahel, or like something entirely lost. Her people have no writing, so her name exists only in the mouths of those who speak it, and when they die, it dies. She is a keeper of memory. In a culture without writing, certain people hold the stories, the knowledge of where water can be found in dry years, the names of ancestors, the events that shaped the community, the reasons why certain practices are followed. She tells a story to the children gathered around her. It's a story her grandmother told her, about a time when the land was dry, when people wandered for days without finding water, when the sun burned without mercy and the wind carried only dust. But then the sky opened and rain fell, and the land turned green, and the people gave thanks to the spirits of water and sky. The children listen, but they don't really understand. They have never been thirsty. They have never walked for days without seeing water. The story is interesting, but it's not real to them. It's like a story about monsters or spirits, exciting but not applicable to their lives. The old woman knows this. She can see it in their faces. And part of her wonders if she's wrong to tell the story. If the rains have truly returned forever, if the old dry times are gone and will never come back, then why frighten children with tales of thirst? But her grandmother told her the story. And her grandmother's grandmother told her. And the knowledge feels important, even if she can't articulate why. So she tells it, and the children listen, and then they run off to play, and the moment passes. She doesn't know, she cannot know, that the story is about to become real again. The rains are already weakening. Not here, not yet, but at the northern edge of the green zone. The monsoons are still reaching this far, but the northernmost extent of summer rains is beginning to retreat southward. Lakes at the desert's northern margin are starting to shrink. Settlements near those lakes are noticing that the water level drops a little each year, that the fishing isn't quite as good, that the grazing near the shore is a little sparser. They adapt. People always adapt. They move to larger lakes. They dig wells to supplement surface water. They range their cattle farther in search of good grass. These are not desperate measures yet. These are just normal adjustments, the kind of thing people do when conditions vary. But the variation is not random. It is directional. The Earth's orbital parameters are shifting again on the same timescales that created the Green Sahara. The northern hemisphere summer is receiving slightly less solar radiation. The difference is tiny, fractions of a percent, but the climate system is sensitive to small changes when those changes persist across centuries. The monsoon is weakening. Jump forward 500 years. It is now approximately 5,000 years ago. The settlement on Megachad is still there, but it has moved. The lake shore has receded. What was once waterfront is now dry land, covered in grass but no longer adjacent to the lake. The settlement has followed the water, relocating several kilometers north. The lake is smaller. Not catastrophically so, but noticeably. The elders talk about how the water used to reach certain rocks, certain trees. Now those markers are inland. The fishing is still good, but you have to go farther out. The reeds are sparser. The people are not panicking. This is a dry period, they tell themselves. It happens. There have been dry years before, even dry decades. The rains will return to their former strength. They always do. Except they don't. The monsoon is still bringing rain to the Sahel, to the regions south of the Sahara proper. But the rain band is no longer reaching as far north. The northernmost lakes are drying up. Rivers that once flowed year-round now flow only during the rainy season, and the rainy season is shorter than it used to be. The vegetation is changing. The trees that need the most water, the species that can't tolerate dry seasons longer than a few months, are dying. They don't die all at once. They stop reproducing first. No new seedlings survive the increasingly harsh dry seasons. The adult trees persist for decades, growing slower, looking scruffier, but still providing shade and food and materials. But eventually, they die, and nothing replaces them. The grasslands are becoming more arid. The lush, tall grasses that cattle prefer are being replaced by shorter, tougher species adapted to less moisture. The grazing is still adequate, but it's not as good. You need more land per animal. The wildlife is moving. Elephants, which need enormous amounts of water and food, begin to disappear from the central Sahara. They're not going extinct, they're migrating south, following the rainfall. Hippos are retreating to the largest, deepest lakes. Giraffes are becoming rare. The game that hunters rely on is thinning out, becoming warier, ranging across larger territories. The human population begins to shift. Not in a mass exodus. There are no refugee columns, no desperate flights. But slowly, over generations, the balance tips. More people are leaving than are being born. Young people who grew up near the shrinking lakes hear stories from traders about better lands to the south, about the Nile Valley where the river floods reliably every year, about coastal regions where rain still falls. Some of them leave. They take their families, their cattle, their portable wealth, and they migrate. The old woman's great-granddaughter, now middle-aged herself, makes this decision. The lake is half the size it was when she was a child. The rains are unreliable. 2 years ago, they barely came at all, and half the cattle died. Her children are hungry more often than they should be. The decision is not dramatic. It's practical. They will go south toward more reliable water. They pack what they can carry. They abandon the rest. The houses collapse within a few years, the wooden frames rotting or being scavenged by the few people who remain. The pottery breaks and is left behind. The grinding stones, too heavy to carry, are left where they lie. Within a generation, the settlement is gone. Nothing marks it but a scatter of pottery sherds and stone tools, buried slowly by wind-blown sand. Jump forward another 500 years. Approximately 4,500 years ago. Lake Megachad is a shadow of its former self. It has contracted by 3/4. What was once open water is now exposed lakebed, cracked mud, salt deposits, dead fish decomposing in the sun. The rivers that fed the lake are seasonal now, flowing for a few months after the rains and then drying to chains of isolated pools. The remaining settlements are clustered around the deepest parts of the lake, where water persists year-round. But the people know this is temporary. The water level drops visibly each year. Wells that produced fresh water now produce brackish water tainted with salt. The cattle are dying, not from lack of water entirely, but from the deteriorating quality of the water and the poor nutrition of the remaining grazing land. The rock art changes. The later images show different subjects. Fewer cattle. More camels and goats, animals better adapted to aridity. More images of conflict. People with weapons, scenes that might represent raids over dwindling resources. And more images of what some archaeologists interpret as desperation or prayer. Human figures with arms raised, facing the sky, as if asking, why has the rain stopped? There's an image, painted during this period, that archaeologists call the Weeping Woman. It shows a female figure, stylized but recognizable, with lines flowing from her eyes. Water? Tears? The interpretation is uncertain, but the emotion is clear. This is loss. This is grief. The people who remain are changing their lifestyle. Pure pastoralism, keeping large herds of cattle, is no longer viable. Those who stay are becoming more like desert nomads, keeping smaller herds of more resilient animals, moving constantly in search of the remaining patches of grazing and water. They supplement their diet by foraging for wild plants, by hunting the few remaining game animals, by fishing in the shrinking lakes and rivers. Knowledge is being lost. The old stories about the green times are still told, but they're becoming unbelievable. The children look at the parched landscape and cannot imagine it covered in grass and trees. The stories sound like myths now, like the tales of a golden age that never really existed. But the physical evidence remains, for a while. The dried channels of rivers that once flowed permanently cut through the landscape like scars. The beaches of the old, larger lakes are visible as pale lines high above the current water level. The bones of hippos and crocodiles lie bleaching in the sun in places where there hasn't been water for generations. By 4,000 years ago, the transformation is nearly complete. Lake Megachad has shrunk to roughly its modern size, a shallow, marshy remnant of the vast inland sea it once was. The rivers have stopped flowing. The wadis are dry except for brief periods after rare storms. The grasslands are gone, replaced by sand and rock. The trees are dead, their desiccated trunks lying where they fell, slowly being buried by drifting sand. The Sahara has returned. Or rather, it has re-emerged. This is its natural state during this phase of Earth's orbital cycle. The Green Sahara was the anomaly, a brief flourishing made possible by a specific alignment of climate conditions. Now those conditions have shifted, and the desert reasserts itself. The last settlements are abandoned. The people who remained to the end, the ones who hoped the rains would return, who couldn't or wouldn't leave, finally have no choice. The water is gone. You cannot live without water. They migrate south, to the Sahel, to the Nile Valley, to anywhere that still has reliable rainfall. Some don't make it. The journey is long. The desert, which their great-great-grandparents crossed when it was still grassland, is now a lethal barrier. People die of thirst, of heat, of exhaustion. Their bones join those of the animals who preceded them into extinction or migration. The rock art sites are abandoned. No one lives near them anymore. No one maintains them or adds new paintings. The images remain, protected from weathering by overhanging rock, but they are no longer part of a living culture. They are becoming archaeology. The sand moves in. Not quickly. Desertification is not a sandstorm that arrives overnight. It is a slow process, measured in decades and centuries. But gradually, sand dunes form where there had been soil and grass. The wind, no longer slowed by vegetation, picks up loose sediment and carries it, depositing it in ridges and waves that grow and migrate across the landscape. The old lake beds fill with sand. The river channels are buried. The evidence of the Green Sahara is slowly covered, preserved beneath dunes that will remain largely undisturbed for thousands of years. By 3,500 years ago, the transformation is complete. The Sahara as we know it exists, the largest hot desert on Earth, a barrier between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, a place where rain is so rare that people celebrate when it falls, where life clings to scattered oases fed by deep groundwater, where the landscape is measured not in forests or grasslands but in gradients of lifelessness. The people who migrated away carry memories, but memories fade and transform. The stories of the green times become legends, myths about a paradise lost, about lands of plenty that the gods took away. Egyptian texts from this period mention lands to the west where water once flowed. Biblical and classical sources contain vague references to fertile regions in the interior of Africa that no longer exist. But the specific knowledge, the detailed memory of what the Sahara was like when it was green, is lost. For thousands of years, the Sahara remains a desert. Empires rise and fall around its edges. Egypt flourishes in the Nile Valley, insulated from the interior by the desert barrier. Carthage and Rome control the Mediterranean coast. Ghana, Mali, and Songhai build empires in the Sahel. But the Sahara itself is a void, a place to cross with caravans if you must, but not a place to live. The evidence remains buried. Rock art sites sit silent, visited occasionally by nomads who wonder what the images mean. Why would anyone paint boats and hippos and swimmers in the middle of a desert? The images make no sense. They seem like fantasies, like religious visions, like anything except accurate depictions of reality. When European explorers begin penetrating the Sahara in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they find the rock art and they're baffled. They document it but they don't understand it. Some suggest the images are symbolic. Some suggest they were painted by migrants passing through who depicted scenes from their homelands. Almost no one initially suggests the obvious, that these images depict what was actually here. But the evidence accumulates. Archaeologists excavate settlement sites and find bones of hippos, crocodiles, elephants, animals that cannot survive in desert conditions. Geologists map ancient river channels visible in satellite imagery, channels that show no signs of recent water flow but that clearly once carried permanent rivers. Paleoclimatologists extract sediment cores from ancient lake beds and analyze the pollen, the chemistry, the layers of sand and clay that record environmental changes over millennia. The picture becomes clear. The Sahara was green. Not always, not permanently, but repeatedly, each time Earth's orbital parameters shift into the right configuration, the African monsoon strengthens, the rains move north, and the desert blooms. This has happened many times over the past few 100,000 years. Each time, the greening lasts several thousand years. Each time, it ends, and the desert returns. The most recent greening, the African humid period, lasted from approximately 11,000 years ago to approximately 5,000 years ago. 6,000 years of relative abundance, ending in 1,500 years of progressive desiccation that drove the human inhabitants away and turned grassland back into sand. Why did it end? Orbital mechanics. The Earth's axis is tilted at about 23.5 degrees, but that angle varies slowly over a 41,000-year cycle. The shape of Earth's orbit around the Sun changes over a 100,000-year cycle, and the direction that Earth's axis points wobbles over a 26,000-year cycle. This is called precession. These changes affect how much solar radiation different parts of Earth receive in different seasons. During the African humid period, northern hemisphere summers received more intense sunlight, which strengthened the temperature gradient between land and ocean, which strengthened the monsoon circulation, which brought more rain to North Africa. As the orbital parameters shifted, northern hemisphere summers became slightly cooler. The temperature gradient weakened. The monsoon weakened. The rain belt retreated south. The Sahara dried out. Will it happen again? Will the Sahara turn green once more? Eventually. If human civilization doesn't alter the climate so drastically that natural cycles become irrelevant, then in approximately 15,000 years, Earth's orbital configuration will again favor strong African monsoons. The rains will return. Grass will grow. Lakes will fill. And if humans still exist, they will migrate north into the greening desert, establish settlements, keep cattle, and paint images on rocks. And 6,000 years after that, it will end again. The rains will fail. The lakes will shrink and vanish. The people will leave. The desert will return. This is the cycle, repeating on timescales so long that no human culture can maintain memory across them. But the rock art remains. Those images painted 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, they still exist. The dry Saharan climate preserves them remarkably well. You can visit them. You can stand in a rock shelter in the Tassili-Eniger Plateau, in what is now one of the most arid regions on Earth, and look at paintings of people swimming, of cattle being herded, of boats crossing water. And if you stand there quietly, if you let the silence of the desert settle around you, you can almost hear it, the echo of voices, the lowing of cattle, the splash of water, the sound of a world that existed and then vanished, leaving behind only these images to prove it was ever real. This is what endings look like when they come slowly enough that each generation can deny their happening. The people of the Green Sahara didn't experience apocalypse. They experienced a gradual worsening of conditions, stretched across so many generations that no one alive could remember when things were significantly better. They adapted, they moved, they survived, just not here. The land remembers. Beneath the sand, the bones remain. The dried lake beds remain, their sediments holding the chemical signatures of water that fell 5,000 years ago. The river channels remain, carved into bedrock, waiting for water that won't return for thousands of years. And the people remember, in fragments. The Egyptian god Osiris is associated with green lands and water. Could this be a memory of the Green Sahara? The Berber peoples of North Africa have stories of a time when their lands were more fertile. The Tuareg nomads, who have adapted to desert life more completely than almost any other people, have legends about ancestors who lived differently, in places where water was abundant. But these are fragments, echoes, memories so transformed by time that their connection to actual events is uncertain. The specific knowledge is gone. The Green Sahara has become myth. Except it's not myth. It's history. Real people lived real lives in a real place that looked nothing like what you see today when you look at satellite images of the Sahara. They raised children, kept animals, created art, told stories, loved and fought and worked and died in a landscape that would become so inhospitable that later generations would struggle to believe anyone ever lived there at all. This is Chronos. We don't just tell history, we take you there. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to understand that everything changes, landscapes, climates, civilizations, and that the world we know is not permanent but simply the current frame in a much longer story. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we're taking you to places and times that will change how you see the world. Drop a comment and tell us, what lost world do you want us to explore next? Until next time, remember, the desert keeps its secrets, but the rocks remember everything, and if you know how to listen, they still tell the story of rain that fell 6,000 years ago, and the people who drank it, and the world that ended when the sky stopped weeping. This is Chronos. We don't just tell history, we take you there.